My name is Louis Zaki, and I'm here to tell you some things I think you don't know about polyhedra dice shapes. I was the first person to make polyhedra dice in the United States back in 1974, and in 1980, 6 of the people that I was selling dice to and had been building their reputations as excellent dice manufacturers were telling people that they were making my dice, and that's how they got into the dice business, and that's how most of the people who are in the dice business today got there. One of the things that disturbs me is people who don't make dice for a living continuously complain to me about the problems that they perceive are just unforgivable. But that they don't seem to remember that from 1974 till 1980, when I was the only person making dice, there was nothing but opaque dice available. And all those opaque dice have the same problem that my gem dice do, except that you couldn't see it, so nobody ever bothered to complain about it. People come up and they say, "What's the matter with you? Every one of these dice has got a little bitty blemish at the bottom. Why, God bless America, if you knew what you were doing, you could get rid of that blemish. Don't you realize how badly that's going to make the dice roll? Other people can make dice without that problem. Why can't you make that dice without problem?" So I have to tell them the facts of life are that, improbable as it may seem, dice, just like plastic model airplanes and plastic model tanks and plastic model cars, are cast on a casting runner. And you have to clip it off the casting runner in order to get it separated. And this is the result of what happens after you cut it free. But because all my competitors are using a shortcut to get ink into the digits, they don't seem to have that problem, but they do. And so the first thing they do is they put their dice into a rock polisher and they tumble them with a very coarse material to polish off that blemish, because if they don't, paint's going to lodge in there and it's going to be very obvious. After they have tumbled them to remove that blemish, they put the dice into a French fry basket and immerse the French fry basket into the bottom of a paint bucket. When they pull it out, every dice in that French fry basket is coated with paint, and it's now red or white or black, whatever the paint color was. After the dice have dried, they're put back into that same rock polisher and they're tumbled again, because you don't want all that paint. What you want is a contrasting color in the digit. And so the second tumbling removes all the unwanted paint from the outside of the dice. And at the same time, it's destroying all the edges on the dice, and it's removing the vertices on the dice. But that's okay. When the dice have finished tumbling that second time, they now have blemishes, scars, and unsightly scratches all over the surfaces, which nobody likes to look at. So then they put the dice back into a rock polisher, only this time the rock polisher's got a very fine medium, and it tries to polish the dice and bring them back to a more acceptable appearance. Now, as you look at this dice, you can see that it has lots of luster and fire. And if you went to any of my competitors' booths, you would notice that every one of them has a great big lamp shining down on their display to make the dice look as lustrous as mine. But I don't have a big lamp, and I don't need one, because I'm using the premium grade materials. And the premium grade materials cost more than the cheap stuff they're using, and so they can't get to the lustrous appearance that I have. Now, as a result of having put those dice in that rock polisher 3 times, this is what comes out. The first stack of dice you see there were dice that I took out of Redbox Dungeons and Dragons, and I stacked them on top of each other, and then I took 10 more dice out of Redbox Dungeons and Dragons and stacked them on top of each other. It should be apparent that the first stack is 3/4 of an inch taller than the second stack. If all those dice came from the same source, why don't they reach the same height? And the answer to that question is because all those dice are egg-shaped. And the dice in the first stack were stacked with the number 1 facing the number 20, while all the dice in the second stack were stacked with the number 9 facing the number 12. Which means that the dice are going to behave like everything else in nature. They're going to try to find their lowest center of gravity when they're rolled. Those dice will roll lots of 9s and 12s and very few 1s and 20s. If this was a dice and you threw it, would you really expect that dice to land like this as often as it lands like that? would you expect it to land as often like this as it lands like that? And the answer is no. When you take an egg out of a carton, it always rolls over on its side because gravity is pulling it down to its lowest center of gravity. And that's what's happening with dice as well. So a lot of game masters prematurely kill off characters that deserve to live, but the game masters are using rounded edge dice that cannot roll saving numbers. And you probably heard the story of the game master turns to the player and he says, "George, your character's dead unless you can roll a 20 and save him." And George says, "Gee, where's my green 20? That's the one that always rolls high." And he pulls it out, rolls it, and he saves more often than the law of averages says he should, because that dice is short on the 120 axis, and that's why it rolls more 20s. So here you see gem dice that were made by TSR, and they have the same problem as the opaque colored dice that were made by TSR. This is a diamond color right here, so you can see through it, but I thought if I made 2 stacks of diamonds, they might not be able to see it. These are dice that were brought in from Germany by Koplau. These are the Armory's finest dice, and then these are the dice that come in from Taiwan that everybody sells and puts their name on and pretends that they make, but they don't. And then these are my dice. Now, people have said repeatedly, "Your dice have got that blemish and it's going to make them roll funny. What's the matter with you? Why do you sit up nights putting this scar on those dice?" Well, to show how important that blemish is, I made 2 stacks. One of these stacks has no blemish facing no blemish. The other stack has blemish facing blemish. And as you look at the tops, you can see that those dice pretty much reach the same height in both stacks. Now, the answer to this question is, which of them is blemish to blemish? And the answer is that the black stack is blemish to blemish. And how you know I'm telling the truth is when you look at this, you can see lots of 8s and 2s. And the reason you see lots of 8s and 2s is because the clip mark is always on the same side. So when you put the blemish down, you're going to get the faces that are adjacent to the blemish. And so what we have here are dice that will grant you equal access to all the faces that they have. A lot of people come up and say, "Don't you have a dice that rolls high?" Oh, and I said, "No, I don't, but my dice don't roll low either. They will give you equal access to all the faces that they have. They will do what a dice is supposed to do, which is randomize." Now, my dice have sharp, crisp edges for a very good reason. These are casino dice. Casino dice are required by federal law to have sharp, crisp edges so that they will surrender a uniform amount of energy as they gallivant across a tabletop. But cheats who want to take unfair advantage of an unknowing player will trim 1/1000th of an inch off of every one of the edges where they want the dice to continue in motion. And they don't work for a living, they just roll dice and cheat you out of your money. So, you may see somebody do something like this, and what they're doing is they're looking for that 1/1000th of an inch gap between the 2 faces. And when a dice has not been tampered with, you see it's one continuous surface. But if somebody's been tampering with it, you'll see this little hairline crack between the 2 dice. And that shows you that that's one of the faces where the guy has trimmed a little bit off the dice. Now, 1/1000th of an inch is enough to allow this cheater to make huge profits pretending to gamble. Those dice are more than 1/1000th of an inch shy of being uniform. But my dice are absolutely uniform. And it's really important in the performance of a dice to know. So when I show you these dice, I'm going to point out some features that you've probably all seen in your friends' collections, but you didn't pay attention. As you look at this 20, do you see that the hook on the 2 is missing, and the bottom is missing on the 20, and there's 2 breaks in the 0? That's because this dice got polished on this side so often that it lost that. Then the next dice to it has no hook, but it's got its bottom, and the 0 is pretty good. That means that this edge right here is sharper than this edge over here. So the radii of every one of the edges is unique to every single one of the dice. Furthermore, each dice has a different space available as the surface on which the dice is going to rest when it stops moving.